Hello everyone, Time to Grind here, and today I wanted to give my first impressions of Midair. And if you don't know what Midair is, it's kind of like the spiritual successor to Tribes and those type of games, the games that, had a lot of movement, and it was like skating down, or snowboarding down like mountains, and, jetpacks and shooting people while you're flying past them and capture the flag and stuff like that. And so, if you're like me, who is either a little too young to play those games at their peak popularity, or just didn't have a PC or just didn't even really know those games existed, this is your first impressions are most likely going to be kind of similar to mine, because what Midair seems to be is it seems to be a game made for a dedicated fan base of players that were in love with Tribes, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with making a game with a specific target demographic in mind. But the one thing I feel like this game does not do well is try to introduce more people into what makes that genre great, because apparently there's obviously a player base for it. There's a lot of people that really love Tribes and really are interested in a game to be a modern Tribes experience. And that's fine, but it doesn't seem like Midair is trying or wanting to get more people into that vision. Because overall, I just want to kind of preface this, similar to my Quake Champions video. I am not a person that played any of the Tribes games. I think I played one Tribes game. I don't know when or what Tribes it was, but I played it for like 30 minutes. Probably less than that. So I am not a person that is even really in this genre, because this genre is very unique. There's been like one game series that kind of defined its own genre, then nothing else really came out. So this is kind of in that genre, this very niche genre. And so I haven't experienced this, but overall, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I tend to be pretty decent at first-person shooters, because that's been my favorite genre of games for the longest period of time, even when I was on consoles and I played Call of Duty and Halo and all that stuff. But, normally when I transition between FPS games, my skill in those kind of at least transitions a little bit. And there might be an adjusting period. Like when I first got into Rainbow Six, I was terrible, because I kept trying to play the game like it was CSGO, and that doesn't work at all. And when I started playing Midair, and I've only played it for about a couple hours, so, obviously I have not gotten good enough to, do movement amazing, so all this gameplay you're seeing is going to be terrible. I just want to preface that, and I feel like a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, you just didn't really get into Midair. You played it for a tiny little bit, and then, you gave up. So that's not a really good first impressions. And what I have to say about that is, yeah, it's true that, I didn't spend a lot of time to try to really learn this game. And that's because the first impressions of this game for me were not very great. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of things in Midair, in terms of first impressions that I had, that really put me off from the game. And one of them is, I'm not normally someone that really hates on an art style, but the art style of this game does not seem very original. It just seems like the kind of typical cartoon thing, and the gun models look very ugly and stuff like that. But that's not, why I don't like this game. That, I can get over ugly stuff like that, that's not at all why I'm not liking this game, but it is a first impression video, and my first impressions of the game were, oh no, this game, doesn't really look that great, and, there's subconscious stuff thinking like, okay, well, this game can't be that great if it looks like this. As much as I hate to admit it, there was a little bit of that, but, whatever, I'm not a graphics guy, so I go into the game. It's like, hey, you gotta play these 2 tutorials. Okay, fine enough, It makes sense that if this game's really complicated and, had a really hardcore player base with the high skill ceiling, it would make sense that it's wanting you to force you to do the tutorials before. The movement tutorial, it's kind of, I get it. I understand it. I did a lot of surfing in TF2 and, Half-Life, or not Half-Life, and, CSGO and stuff like that, so I kind of know movement in first-person shooter games. So I get the movement down a little bit. Obviously, as you're seeing real gameplay, I'm not getting the movement down, but in the tutorial I was fine. Kind of did all that, did the shooting tutorial. It kind of barely explained a little bit. At one point it's like, okay, yeah, go to this machine and change your loadout, and you open up the loadout, and there's just this massive like upgrade and skill tree for these different types of armor, and they're all like locked, and it's just like extremely overwhelming, because it's like, oh yeah, just go ahead and switch your weapon, and then you try to do it, but then there's like a million things on this skill tree, and you're like, oh my god, what have I gotten myself into? And Obviously, not bad to have a very complicated system, but in terms of first impressions, it overwhelmed me. And one thing I do want to say before kind of continuing this video is I do want to praise Midair in its payment model. Obviously, the game's free to play, and so you'll slowly unlock ways to unlock this stuff in that skill tree or whatever, but you can just pay like $25 and everything is unlocked permanently for the future and currently, and I like the way it's doing it because it gave it a free-to-play way to play the game. You know, it's free, but then you gotta grind a lot, you know, to get the upgrades and stuff, and then it has a $25 like buy-to-play game, you know, version that you can just be like, hey, I want to just buy this game, let's do it, got it, good. And I really like that payment model. It's why I really like Quake Champions. But that aside, it doesn't do a very good job at making it not overwhelming at the beginning of your, you know, the game, because you open it up and then it's just like, oh lord, because it doesn't explain it. It just says go find it, go equip a different gun, and you gotta find it in there, and it's just a little overwhelming, but that's fine. Complete the tutorial, go in the game, and because there's not that big of a player base, you know, right now there's like a 500 you know, peak players at 24 hours. That's a decent amount of players, but not for a type of game that has a lot of players per game. You know, if you have a 500 you know, player count for like a 1v1 card game, that could be pretty decent because, you know, they're 1v1, so that's 250 different matches that can be going on at once. But in, you know, a game that needs to have a ton of people playing per match, and really relies heavily on that, having 500 players is not a lot. And keep in mind, this is like the game just came out in free to play, and this is the player base, because normally when a game first comes out, there's a big player base and then it drops down to what the dedicated player base is going to be. And with a game like this, it definitely seems like it's trying to I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it definitely seems like it's going to be one of those games, sadly, that just has a very small player base, and it's just for the dedicated fans that like that type of game, because obviously this kind of snowballs. So if the game for the longest time just has a, you know, peak player base of 200 players, say, or so we'll even be generous, we'll say it doesn't drop and it's at 500 like it is now. Every single game is going to just, every game's going to have just amazing people in the game that have played the game for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and then probably played the Tribes games for hundreds of hours as well. So anytime someone tries to play the game that's a new player to the genre or the series or anything like that, they're going to get into a game. There's only going to be 5 servers that are populated, so they're going to have to join one of them, and they're going to get stomped. And that's kind of what happened to me. And obviously, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, you didn't put enough hours, you didn't put enough time in the game, you know, you're just bad, you have to learn how to play the game, and then the game is fun and stuff like that. But these are my first impressions, and my first impressions are going to be the first impressions, like I said, that the majority of the player base is going to have that when they try out the game for the first time, because obviously there's only a certain amount of players that are coming from Tribes, because if there truly were millions and millions of people that loved and enjoyed Tribes, and they were just so thirsty for a new experience, a new modern Tribes experience, it doesn't matter how buggy or broken this game would be, this game would have a lot more players than 500. If there truly was that big of an audience. And, you know, I'm kind of in the same boat with Quake Champions. I really like Quake Champions, but the arena shooter genre is, unfortunately, doesn't have that big of a player base. That's why I like Quake Champions, like I said, because they've kind of brought in some, you know, fan base of the hero shooter genre, because they sprinkled in a little hero shooter into their game. And it's, you know, very simple, and the first impressions of Quake Champions are kind of like, okay, you know, here's their free-to-play model is the heroes, they give you like 1 or 2 heroes, and then, you know, you can slowly unlock the other heroes, or you can just buy a pack like Midair that just unlocks every hero, current and future. So your first impressions in Quake Champions are, you pick a hero, or a champion, or whatever they call them, and you're just playing that person, and then it's a normal arena shooter. And the arena shooter has a lot of nooks and crannies, but it's a lot more simple than this, and the first impression of that is a lot less overwhelming, because when you play Midair, you play the tutorial, and you open up this perk tree, and there's a million different perks, and, you know, skill trees, and unlocks, and upgrades, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And then you get in a game, and, you know, like me, like you're seeing in my gameplay, your movement, like, is terrible, because in Quake, the movement's a very important part of Quake Champions, but just because if you can't, like, strafe jump or circle jump right off the bat, that's not going to really affect you as much as in Midair or the Tribes games, where if you can't do the movement perfectly, you're just not going to have a chance. And, you know, like I said, it's not a bad thing for games to have high skill ceilings, but on top of all of the bad first impressions that this game gives, having there be a very high skill floor is not the best, because high skill ceilings are fine by me. You know, obviously you want there to be a lot of room for improvement for each player, and, you know, each person to constantly feel like they're learning new things. But when a game has a very high skill floor, meaning that you have to put in a lot of work just to understand the fundamentals and basics of the game, that's when it gets a little icky. And I'm not saying that Midair is the most complicated thing ever and, you know, all that, but I'm just saying that the first impressions of Midair, for me anyways, and I truly believe that a lot of people that aren't, you know, Tribes fanatics and stuff like that are going to have the same kind of experience as me, is it's just a lot of feelings of overwhelming just stuff happening, and feeling like there's not a whole lot of reason for me to improve because these people are a million times better than me. And I know that sounds bad, and because you're like, oh, you just don't want to improve and stuff like that, but it's more to that. There's just a lot of very not that great first impressions that I feel like Midair makes for me personally. And you know, although I'm not even touching on, you know, kind of performance issues that I'm having and a lot of people are having, because I believe that can be fixed, but that is a thing right now. And like I've said, the graphics aren't, the art style's not great, and I feel like that's going to put a lot of players off, because personally I was willing to give it a try even though I didn't like the graphics. There's a lot of people that won't, unfortunately, and I just feel like there's a lot of things that Midair has first, like, impression wise, that is going to make it very difficult to be a very popular game. But, you know, if it wants to just stay as its game that's just going to have 300 players playing at any given moment, and they're all just, you know, Tribes and Midair fanatics that are all just, you know, veterans, and that's just the game they enjoy playing, it's gonna be a good game for that, I feel. But for the general audience, you know, not even trying to become like a big esport, but just to have, you know, a decent player base, I don't see this game being successful in that way, just because of kind of the first impressions that the game gives up. But obviously, we're all humans. You guys could have had a completely different experience with Midair, you know, if you guys tried it out. And I'd highly recommend you guys to try it out, because it is free, and I'm sure a lot of people could find fun things in it. Just doesn't seem like the game for me. But if you guys have any different opinions on Midair, if you guys personally played Tribes and then played Midair, or you didn't play Tribes and you did play Midair and you have any opinions, let me know in the comments down below, because I'd love to hear it all. You know, because part of the fun of making this show isn't to just talk at you guys, but the conversation that comes afterwards. But either way, if you guys enjoyed this video, then consider leaving a like down below and subscribing to see more content. Videos come out every Wednesday and Sunday. And like always, guys, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and see you guys next time.